Hello and welcome to this webinar today. I'm Mark Bunting, the host of RCTV. Our guest today is Tim Rotolo. He is the CEO of Premier American Uranium. Thanks for being with us today, Tim.
Thanks very much for having me, Mark.
Okay, we'll get back to Tim in just a moment. He's going to give his presentation, and then we have some questions from you. You just have to enter them in the chat box on your screen, and we'll get to your questions toward the end of the show after the presentation. Now, some information on Premier American Uranium Inc. PUR. It is a subsidiary of Consolidated Uranium and is focused on the consolidation, exploration, and development of uranium projects in the United States. One of PUR's key strengths lies in the agreements it has to acquire extensive land holdings in two prominent uranium producing regions in the U.S., which are the Great Divide Basin of Wyoming and the Uravan mineral belt of Colorado. With a rich history of past production and historic uranium mineral resources, PUR is initiating work programs to advance its portfolio in 2023. PUR intends to apply to list its shares on the TSX Venture Exchange, cementing its position as a leading U.S. uranium player. Again, a reminder to those who are live on the line today, there's a chat function. As we go through the webinar, you can type in your questions. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. And having said that, Tim, I will hand it over to you and get out of your way. Off you go.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much, Mark. And good afternoon, everybody. It's another exciting moment for the uranium industry with the coup that we're having in Niger, and then we had this incident with Peninsula. So just a fundamental backdrop that continues to, I think, surprise everybody, and hopefully sends a message to the utilities that the production that they thought would fill the supply deficit is not a given, and we think that's one of the reasons why a U.S. uranium pure play story is so interesting today. Now, I'll give you some background. Sachem Cove, who is the largest investor, we're also going to be one of the larger investors in this round, continuing to add to our position. We actually began incubating this company in 2018, really on the basis that the United States was a very safe jurisdiction with a long history of uranium mining. At one point, we were self-sufficient, producing enough uranium to fill all of the nuclear power demands the United States had as the largest user of uranium for nuclear power. And that effectively there was because of geopolitics and basically much lower cost of uranium coming from the rest of the world, there was a period of time over the last 20 years where the uranium mining industry in the U.S. has basically been gutted, and so today we produce effectively zero uranium, and we think that will mean revert over time. And we've seen even today, another bipartisan bill passed in the Senate to support the U.S. nuclear industry. That's not to mention the Inflation Reduction Act, which is highly supportive of nuclear power plants. And then several other bills which could be very positive in terms of banning Russian uranium imports, and again just fundamentally supporting the U.S. uranium mining industry for the first time in a very long time. So we originally targeted a project called Cyclone in Wyoming at Sachem Cove. We did that in 2018, as I noted earlier, and since then, we had a chance to get together with Consolidated Uranium to form a new company, which has both assets in Colorado and Wyoming. And we like these states because they're past production, positive political backdrops. And part of this for us in doing so today is that, we do think that there is a very strong tailwind, and part of that is not only what's happening politically, but also what's happening in terms of the actual term contracting market and how tight that's becoming. And ultimately, we think that we're at an inflection point for the market to move much higher in terms of physical prices, and that should benefit equities. And ultimately, for stories like Premier to work, we need there to be real demand, end user demand for uranium, and we think that is finally in the offing. So as I said, I'm part of Sachem Cove. I was one of the founders with Mike Alkin, and we really wanted to try and bring a different viewpoint to the uranium mining industry. Obviously, we've been investors in many companies. We've met with most management teams, and we really wanted to try and highlight or emphasize a couple of the characteristics that we believe as investors are so important to management teams, and in certain instances have been lacking in the industry. And so that's not only being highly disciplined, but also opportunistic. So opportunistically trying to acquire assets, and also having an understanding of where we are in the cycle, so that we can better determine which lever we want to pull for value creation. Should we be buying assets? Should we be exploring? And really trying to have a strategic plan and a thoughtful process about how to deploy capital on behalf of our shareholders. And then perhaps most importantly is we want to eat our own cooking. We're the largest shareholders. As I said, we're adding to our position in this round. Consolidated is holding a large block of their stock. We really want to align ourselves with shareholders. And so, not only are we not selling into the offering, we're adding. Consolidated will hold their position. And we're not taking any compensation to manage the company. We're purely aligning ourselves as shareholders, and the outcome, positive outcome for shareholders are positive outcomes for us. And we think that's how, management should really be acting. And this should not be just a paycheck for people. So a significant rationale for us, or for me personally, so we've been long-term investors in Consolidated Uranium. We've invested in their other spin-off, Labrador Uranium. We loved just the formula that they put together and the platform that they've built. But as we thought about how to bring Premier Uranium, that was our company prior to Premier American, to market, we recognized that we not only needed capital markets expertise, but we really needed on-the-ground expertise in the western part of the United States. And I had an opportunity to go out and meet with the team at Consolidated that's going to be managing their projects in Utah and now Colorado with us. And I recognized that this was a huge competitive advantage for us to be able to partner with them and have day one access to people who've been on the ground for decades. They have relationships. This is a significant barrier to entry to other participants who may want to try and get involved in the United States. And so, the people for us is extremely pivotal. And I think there perhaps is not as much appreciation for, the fact that the people and the relationships that they've established and their ability to go call on their relationships for, simple things like drill rigs and, permitting consultants and some of the blocking and tackling aspects of running a mining business. And then in terms of the potential, we think that, as I said, there's a real inflection point occurring in the market right now with the term contracting market, with the geopolitical backdrop that just seems to continue to surprise everybody. But I think the one thing that we've learned in the uranium mining industry is that you shouldn't be surprised by anything. And so we have an incredibly large deficit that's formed. We have an incredibly tenuous geopolitical backdrop, and we think that sets the United States apart as a very safe jurisdiction. And perhaps most importantly, and I'll touch on this as we get into a couple of the other slides, but the magnitude of the deficit is going to require many, many more projects than people give credence to. And so I think there's an expectation that several of these larger scale projects are going to fill the deficit, and then, problem solved, we'll move on and prices will go back down to the 20s. But our view is the deficit is so large, it's so challenging, as we've seen, to actually develop a project that even a small scale mine is going to have a place in this market. And so we, even as far back as 2018 and 2019, we had this thesis at Sachem Cove we called the micro producers, that there could be a 500,000 or million pound or 2 million pound producer, and they could have real conversations with utilities and be able to enter into long-term contracts. And so that's, that was really kind of the genesis of trying to get together with Consolidated to begin developing that a project of that nature. And then as it relates to the specific assets, we think Wyoming is amongst the best jurisdictions in the United States. Incredibly positive political backdrop, not only for uranium mining, for nuclear power, long history of production there. Several other, so we have an ISR project there, several other, very strong ISR projects there that, from a technical perspective, we may be able to leverage some of that existing infrastructure. And then we have an incredibly large position that we've built in the Uravan Mineral Belt, which is one of the more prolific past producers in Colorado. That's a little bit further behind in terms of its the exploration and just the progress that we've made at that project. So, we really view Cyclone in Wyoming as our flagship, but again, tremendous potential, not only for exploration, but ultimately for production. So again, as I was saying, I think our internal view at Sachem Cove is the deficit is far larger than, most people continue to give it credit for. I think one of the benefits of having Sachem Cove kind of advising Premier American Uranium from a macro uranium perspective, as I said, is, there are wiggles in the market, right? There are times where it looks like fundamentals are shifting, and really having a deeply embedded and high conviction view on the direction of supply demand, in our opinion, is required. Because if you don't fundamentally believe that there's going to be a supply deficit and that prices are going to go, well into the 80s or 90s, this type of project is not, it's not viable. So obviously we're incredibly bullish on the scale of that deficit. And then I said, from a kind of why now perspective, and really why we tried to accelerate this process as much as we could on our side with Consolidated is, we started to see this inflection occurring in the term contracting market. And so, we think that the last bull market, a lot of people want to say that it was Cigar Lake flooding, but prices had already begun to move dramatically prior to Cigar Lake flooding. And what really was the driver is that you had this dramatic move in term contracting. And so if you look at this chart on the right, the term contracting market was basically dead for a decade, and inventories were worked off. And it's just now that we're beginning to see, rough annual demand numbers are 200 million pounds. Last year, they did about 100 million pounds of term contracting. This year, they're well beyond that already, on pace to maybe do, approaching 200 million pounds. We think you need to see multiple 200 million pound plus years of contracting in order for utilities to really be in a position where they have security of supply. And ultimately, there's just not enough low-cost pounds for them to be able to do that without prices moving. And as we saw with the Diablo Canyon RFP, that moved prices pretty significantly. And again, just, if you're on this call, you most likely believe uranium is in a bull market. From the bottom in 2016 till now, it's more than tripled, and we think that there's significantly more upside in the price of physical uranium. You can't really say enough about the U.S. backdrop today. It's such a 180 from when we started in 2018. There seems like there's just a new article or a new bill or a new country coming out every day saying they're supporting nuclear, or their Department of Energy equivalent has developed some strategic plan to implement nuclear. So we love the tailwind. Obviously, for the first time, the U.S. is not trying to block new nuclear. And so again, the thesis at the Sachem Cove level never required any of these things to happen. This is all kind of a cherry on top. And the more momentum that develops for a real uranium or a nuclear renaissance, it just underpins the fundamentals and the requirement for prices to be even higher than I think the average average estimate is today. And again, this goes back. So why is this such a pivotal bipartisan issue? And it really comes down to the fact that I think for the first time, people are looking at the math of climate change and recognizing that this has become a national security imperative. In order for us to have energy security, you really need to have nuclear or some significant form of baseload power. And if you want to be environmentally friendly and really try and reach net zero, nuclear is really the only clean, affordable baseload power. We haven't really touched on when we initially started staking at Cyclone. The basis for that was that this was a historic project. So there had been work done in 2007 and 2008. There was a drill program done by Turnagain Energy. And then we were approached by a company who had actually tried to advance the project in 2010 and 2012 and 2013. And what we found so interesting is that we could basically benefit from all of this past work. And so you can see, over the past few cycles, there's been these, CapEx cycles. And so obviously, we haven't seen a lot of CapEx for the last decade, but we are able to benefit from basically those sunk costs of other companies. And from a risk reward perspective, we think we have a lot of visibility in terms of what the exploration potential is. We have an exploration target. We have a 43-101 that outlines that will be included in the listing statement. And again, we think that when you look at kind of the overlap between the supply demand fundamentals and then the actual project fundamentals, it's a very, very interesting risk reward. And I think we've continued to de-risk that by identifying data around the drill programs. I'll highlight some of the things that we've done in the project, not only to de-risk the project, but actually to add to the potential, even while the fundraising process has been going on. And again, this is kind of the crux of the issue for us, and this is really what I think attracted Mike to looking at the United States as this kind of really interesting option. And I still think the U.S. is undervalued relative to where it should be, on a comparative basis. I think everyone obviously understands how prolific the Athabasca is with its incredibly high grades, but I don't think that the U.S. is getting credit for its potential as a real uranium producer. And so just, I think that the geopolitics and the reason why you see, I think it was like a 93-7 vote today in the Senate is, I think everybody recognizes that we can't be reliant on former Soviet bloc countries, even if they are, effectively independent. As we've seen with Kazakhstan, it's very easy for the Russians to have a heavy hand and become, highly influential in those countries. And so, the Western utilities, I think for the first time are recognizing that they can't be beholden to someone who is willing to weaponize energy. So moving on to the transaction, our company at Sachem Cove was called Premier Uranium Inc. We're contributing that in exchange for 12 million shares of Premier American Uranium. Consolidated is contributing their 8 DOE leases in exchange for 7.75 million shares. They are intending to distribute roughly half of those shares to their existing shareholders and then holding back half. And so they will not be selling those. And so what you'll have, and the shares in the sale right now, the fundraise that we're doing now, the sub-receipt is roughly 5.5 million, I believe. So you'll have about 29 million shares outstanding, of which more than half will be locked up or held by Premier and or Consolidated. And as I said, in this round, we've announced that Premier is putting in, Sachem is putting in $2 million. Mega Uranium is putting $2 million. And then we have a strategic order from a one of our limited partners at Sachem Cove. And so that's just even more shares that are held by, very friendly strategic investors. And so, we ultimately think we'll have a very nicely held and tight share count coming out. So just moving on, as I said, I'll be acting as CEO and one of the directors. Marty Cunney from Consolidated will be the chairman, and then Greg, the CFO of Consolidated, will also be working with us until we identify a dedicated CFO. And then the other directors, Dan Noth and Mike Harrison, both long-term. Have had long-term involvement in the mining sector. Dan as a lawyer and Mike as an investor, who's now at Sprott Royalty. So both also have significant connectivity in the uranium industry. I apologize for the background noise. So as I said, for us, perhaps one of the most important aspects of our due diligence and really one of the biggest selling points of working with Consolidated Uranium was their on-the-ground team in the U.S. Ted Wilton, just an encyclopedia of knowledge for uranium mining, and has been very, very helpful in terms of trying to help us understand other projects that we're looking at from an M&A perspective. Mike Newman on the regulatory side, and then Tyler Johnson, who's a on-the-ground geologist. So moving on to the projects, as you said, we have kind of two primary focuses today. Wyoming, we have Cyclone, and then Colorado, we have technically 4 projects, but the main focus is going to be Monogram Mesa and Atkinson Mesa. So as you can see, just our projects are Rim and Osborne Draw in red, and you can see the proximity to Lost Creek, which is URG's project, Sweetwater, which is Rio's project, more conventional project. And so there's quite a bit of infrastructure in this area, quite a few other players, but we think we have one of the larger, probably top 5 land packages in the area. So just moving on to the project specifics, as I said, what attracted us initially to the project was there was a technical report and 80 drill holes from 2007 and 2008. The technical report has an exploration target of 7 to 12 million pounds roughly. And so one of the things that we did last year, even as we were just negotiating the deal with Consolidated Uranium, is to have an airborne radiometric survey flown. And so you can see that map that we produced on the bottom right chart side of the slide. And so that produced some very interesting results. You can see these bright red anomalies. It's a little harder to see just because of the size, but in the dead center of the Osborne Draw target, you have this red anomaly, and in the center of that are 2 of the drill holes. And so we're able to use this data and then some of the data that we've been able to acquire specific to the GIST drill program to really hone in on where we want to focus our time and effort for our inaugural drill program, which we hope to start in early 24. We've already begun the process of permitting and licensing for that and lining up drill rig operators. So that will be really the primary use of funds initially. And again, we just think there's a lot to be excited about with these anomalies that we've identified. So that's going to be a big focus, probably where we're spending the most time at the moment. Moving on to Colorado, again, we've built a very large land package. We think there's an opportunity to continue to consolidate land in this area, and ultimately there's a lot of exploration potential. But you'll see from here, so there actually is historic production, and we have kind of this thesis that Ted Wilton developed, which is effectively that a lot of the previous production that was done in this area and exploration was very superficial. And so there hasn't been a lot of kind of dots connected in terms of exploring the resources to their full extent. They just kind of explored the faces of these mesas and then moved on down the line. And so we think we can use that historical work, drill a bit deeper, and ultimately try and expand these resources quite a bit. I think there will also be significant opportunity for M&A in Colorado. We're already working on one deal I would say that there's also an opportunity for some M&A in Wyoming. And so, as I kind of stated earlier in the discussion, I think one of the benefits that we have is that we're investors first, and so we're always looking at kind of what's the highest and best use of our capital. Should we be thinking about M&A or should we be thinking about exploration? I think what's unique about the state of the world today is you have a bunch of junior miners who have really not participated in the bull market nearly the same way that a Cameco or some of the larger players have, and I think there's a lot of fatigue, which plays very nicely into kind of an M&A strategy. And then obviously, we have a significant resources and results that we can work from to expand our drill program. So we think we'll have kind of two parallel paths of M&A as well as just kind of a more traditional exploration program. So just moving through these projects again, very similar story here. Higher grade uranium, more conventional mining opportunity with vanadium. And actually, let me flip back for one moment and just say one other thing that I think is worthwhile. So, well, this is not written in stone. You can see on the bottom left corner of this map is White Mesa Mill, which belongs to Energy Fuels. And so we have another competitive advantage in that, in the event that we put these assets into production and there's excess capacity at White Mesa, the relationship between Consolidated and Energy Fuels should put us in a very good position to be able to utilize that infrastructure for our benefit. And I would just highlight, Energy Fuels is a very large shareholder of Consolidated, and they will be getting shares in this transaction as a result of the spinoff from Consolidated, and they had to vote to approve this, which they obviously did. So just wrapping up, as I said, the reason for this webinar is that we're in the midst of a sub-seed financing round for $10 million Canadian, really to advance the drilling program and a parallel M&A path. We've already made a tremendous amount of progress. I actually failed to mention at the Cyclone project, as a result of the airborne radiometric survey, we basically doubled our land position. There was a bunch of open land that kind of fell right into the anomalies that we identified. So we filled in that open land in the last 6 months. And so we went from about 500 claims to 1,000. We've completed the 43-101 for Cyclone for listing purposes. And as I said, we've already begun the permitting process for the drill program. And the next step is doing a deep dive on data, not only for Cyclone, but also the projects in Colorado, particularly Monogram, which will be our primary focus in that area to begin with. So all this concludes, we hope to finish the capital raise in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then we'll have the listing will hopefully happen in late Q3, early Q4, and then we'll be able to begin our exploration program in late 23 or early 24. So happy to take any questions.
All right, great stuff, Tim. Thanks for that. I'm just wondering if you could go back to 2018, about 5 years ago, and flesh out and elaborate on and explain why you thought the time was right to start this uranium company and what your goals were at the time and what your vision was in terms of running it.
I'm not sure we had a grand vision. I think at that point we recognized that it was a very cheap option if we were right about the macro thesis. And as that story has played out and the geopolitics have played out as we had kind of thought they might, we began to formulate more of a plan about what this could be as a company. I think, as investors, we also recognized that we needed a team. And so it's really taken several years for us to identify what the right team and structure should look like, and then what are the attributes of the company that we think are really important. And I said, you know, having a long-term shareholder base that are highly aligned, having a management team that is opportunistic, but also disciplined in their capital allocation. They're not just drilling for the sake of drilling. They're drilling because, obviously they think that there's data pointing in that direction. But also from a timing perspective, they're allocating capital at the time in the market, right? Because even if you have great drill results, if the uranium market is not directionally in your favor, your company may languish because you may just need to keep raising money. And so you're going to dilute shareholders and not create a lot of shareholder value despite having good drill results. So it's really having this total package of understanding where the market is, understanding how to allocate capital, and then having the right team. And I think part of our excitement about meeting the consolidated team last year when we went out to visit White Mesa after they did their deal with Energy Fuels was I had this light bulb go off in my head where I just said, this is the missing piece for our team. Because we had interviewed a number of other people and just the fit was not there. And so the consolidated platform, and they had also just done the Labrador spinoff. And so we had kind of a roadmap where we had the right structure to bring to the market that Consolidated had already kind of really road tested successfully. And obviously we participated in a meaningful way at Sachem Cove. And then we had the team on the ground who could help us to really operationalize things from day one. But we've been working together really since October of last year, advancing these projects, not only in Colorado, but in Wyoming as well, as if we were acting as a team. So it's been incredibly synergistic, and I think complementary is ultimately what we were striving for, is having these complementary skill sets.
And at the same time, you recognized, or let me phrase it this way: at some point over the past few years, there was this shift in terms of government support and this so-called uranium renaissance. And so you have what is unusual in the States in a polarized situation from a government standpoint, where you do have bipartisan support. You've also got the Inflation Reduction Act helping uranium in terms of investment. So can you maybe just sort of describe that atmosphere and that tailwind for the sector right now and for your company?
Yeah, I guess we don't place a ton of credence on government support because it can be fleeting, right? And so I think to build something because the government's doing something, has generally not gone well for a lot of people. But I think, as I said, I think we didn't need those things to happen. They're great because it brings more attention to the space and it highlights what we already knew, right? That there's this supply deficit, that the Russians control a lot of the nuclear fuel cycle, and maybe we should be doing more here in the US. But again, I would say the government support piece is it's an added tailwind, but there were so many other positives that had already developed. And I think to us, the bigger thing is that the geopolitics have forced the utilities to come back to the market. So to us, that inflection point was probably more important, right? Because to date, some of the companies have benefited from the Strategic Uranium Reserve, but it hasn't been meaningful. I mean, I think the more meaningful thing is the Inflation Reduction Act, and but again, that's underpinning demand. It's not necessarily helping the miners directly. It's just further supporting the fact that this demand is not going to 150 million pounds from 200 million pounds. It's probably going to 220 or 230 million. And then all the small modular reactor stuff, it's great, but again, I'm not sure it's even relevant to this cycle, right? Because those reactors probably aren't going to get built till 2030, So again, it's all just the direction is so forceful and helpful, but I think we would have been doing this regardless of all those things.
Okay, fair enough. Here's a question from Romina Calderon. would you consider using the Shootering Canyon mill, which is closer than White Mesa? Shootering, controlled by Anfield Energy, as you probably know, a company that we've talked to several times.
Well, it doesn't work, and they need like $100 million. So, I mean, listen, if it was there, I'm not sure Shootering is actually that much closer. So it is very close to some of the Utah assets that Consolidated controls. Like, I actually went there. I drove right by Shootering. So I know the proximity. So it's much closer to the Utah assets of Consolidated than our Colorado assets. And I think one of the reasons that Colorado is less competitive is because no one has access to a mill there, right? So why would you go build a conventional mine in Colorado if you can't mill it?
Right. So, fair enough.
Yep.
Could you flesh out the plans? I mean, you touched on it already, but just flesh out the plans for Cyclone in Wyoming, and then Monogram Mesa, and the other one, the two in Colorado. Just the timeline, and even second part of that would be it is a brownfield project. You're dealing with past producing areas compared to a company that makes a discovery and they don't get the production for 10 or 12 years. So what's a realistic timeline to meaningfully get close to production?
I think it's too early to try and say what that looks like, just because I think there's still a lot of exploration work that has to get done. So timeline for Cyclone, that's really kind of been our primary focus, is again permitting and licensing over the next quarter or two. Hopefully, maybe we get some drilling done in 2023, but more likely in early 24. And then we see what the results look like and determine if we want to continue drilling there, and really try and expand that land program, or the drill program. And then again, I think a lot of the work that we're going to do in Colorado initially is going to be about trying to identify the data so that we can de-risk and figure out where it makes the most sense to drill. Again, having Ted Wilton and Tyler and Mike, who spent a tremendous amount of time out there, we do know where the data is. And so part of it is just having the time and bandwidth to be able to work through that. As I said, we're simultaneously working through some due diligence on transactions that we think are really interesting in both Wyoming and Colorado. So, I think we have to take everything day by day and just, again, we're going to toggle to where we think the best opportunity is, whether that's M&A or exploration. And right now I think we're kind of down the middle. They both look pretty interesting, and so as we do more due diligence and get some drilling results, then we'll be able to kind of make the next logical decision.
Right. And when you make that decision, does it have to be one or the other? Could you have a dual track kind of situation?
Absolutely. And I think, if you look at the size of our capital raise, it's probably a bit larger than some of our peers of similar size. And that the rationale is that we do want to have some dry powder to be able to do, more than one thing. We want to be able to do M&A and not necessarily just use stock. So if there are accretive cash transactions that we can do, we want to have a balance sheet to be able to do that. But also we want to have enough runway so that if, for some reason, macro uranium market slows down or prices don't continue to move up the way that we think they can, we don't have to go out and dilute shareholders.
Lastly, Tim, as we look to wrap this up and to get your final thoughts, you have said that the time is now for premier American Uranium. Can you summarize everything you've been talking about as to why and why investors should pay attention, especially when the stock becomes public sometime in, as you said, in several weeks' time?
Yeah, so obviously we think, prices for physical uranium should begin to continue to move up, right? They've moved up quite nicely this year already. I think the term contracting market and spot market is very, very tight, which should drive prices higher. I think the U.S. is a relatively appreciated part of the market today. Obviously, you have UEC and Encore and URG and Peninsula, but there's no real pure play exploration stories. And so we think, that's why we want to come to the market. We have a differentiated story from that perspective. Again, all those or political tailwinds in the U.S. We don't need a Russian uranium ban, but that sure would prove our thesis out. And then I think the team for us is a significant differentiator, right? I think we're trying to think about investing in this market differently and and running a company differently than a lot of the other management teams in terms of having that dual path of M&A and exploration, but also having that guided by a team that's been expert investors in the sector and really letting that guide us. And then perhaps most importantly, we are more aligned than any other management team that I'm aware of in terms of owning a ton of stock and not taking any compensation. And so, we really want to eat our own cooking, and our success, will be your success. So if we all win together, I think that's our goal, right? I think there's too many stories out there where management teams are getting paid a lot of money and their shareholders have not benefited in the same way. And so, we certainly want to see that alignment. And again, we just think there's a significant inflection point occurring in the market. And, this is a very interesting entry point into the sector.
And what percentage is owned by insiders, roughly?
Over 50%.
Okay.
So Sachem will own roughly 40% pro forma, and then you have another, so maybe even 60% of the company.
All right, so lots of skin in the game. One more quick question here from Ramina before we wrap it up. When do you expect the financing to close? I'm not sure if you mentioned that time frame.
2 to 3 weeks.
2 to 3 weeks.
Yes.
Okay, well, very interesting stuff today, Tim. Fascinating and exciting to see a new company on the horizon and about to go public. So great to talk to you. Thanks for the insight, and I'm sure we'll do it again.
Thanks very much for your time. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, Tim Rotolo, CEO of Premier American Uranium. Thanks for taking part today. We'll see you next time. Take care.